Welcome to the Everyday Epigenetics Raw, Real, Relatable podcast. I'm your host, Susan Robbins, epigenetic human performance coach. This is where we discuss all things lifestyle, environment, food, exercise, work, mind, and social interaction as they pertain to epigenetic expression in a way that's relatable to everyone. So if you're ready to start viewing you as an individual, take control of your life and health, and get results, buckle up, here we go. Welcome to the Everyday Epigenetics Raw, Real, Relatable podcast. I'm your host, Susan Robbins. This is a place where we talk about everything lifestyle and environment and how it relates to our genetic expression. As anybody who has listened to me, whether it's been day one or episode 115, you all know that I have chronic Lyme. You just never get rid of it. It is in remission, but this is such a passion of mine to bring this to the forefront. And we've touched on it through some other podcasts, but today we're really going to focus on it. My guest today is Nicole Bell. And when you hear her bio, you're gonna be like, wow. I said, boy, do I feel like the ultimate underachiever here. She's brilliant. And she has the most compelling story of her husband's journey, which becomes the whole family's journey, if you know anyone with chronic illness, with Lyme disease. And when I heard her on another podcast, I said, I need to get her on here. She is going to be a great vessel to help me get the word out. Because Lyme, last time I checked, they said it was over 300,000 cases that are diagnosed every year. Now that's diagnosed. It took 11 years to diagnose me. And when you hear Nicole's journey, you're going to hear about the nightmare there trying to get her husband diagnosed. It's so difficult. The testing is crap. And so Nicole's going to talk about the testing that she has helped develop that is not crap and why it really makes a difference to test and not guess. And that's what we're going to talk about today. I think you're going to be totally riveted because we'll start with her story. And she has a book. And if you are on video, you will see me hold it up. It's What Lurks in the Woods. It gets me emotional because I just know trying to figure out what is wrong with you when you know something's not right. And this is everything I talk about on this show is being your best medical advocate and never giving up in that search when you know something isn't right and every doctor tells you you're fine. So Nicole Bell, she's an experienced executive in the medical device and diagnostic industries in roles ranging from the science and engineering to business development and marketing. She holds, a bachelor's and master's degree from MIT in material science and engineering, as well as a master's of science degree in biomedical engineering from Duke. Okay, see what I'm saying, guys? I feel like an underachiever here. And I salute her. Her best-selling, award-winning memoir, What Lurks in the Woods, vividly, it goes with this podcast, raw, real, relatable to anybody that's had chronic disease. Vividly details her family's experience with undiagnosed tick-borne infections. And her firsthand knowledge of the devastating impact of misdiagnosed chronic illness fuels her passion to drive a new diagnostic standard of care for the industry. I'm so grateful for this. She also served as the primary author of The State of Lyme Disease Research in the United States and regularly collaborates with the Center for Lyme Action to change the political landscape for Lyme disease and its related co-infections. I'm so excited that I reached out to her as soon as I heard her on the other podcast, and like right away she said I would be honored to be on. So I'm the one who's honored to have you on here. Welcome, Nicole Bell.
Hey, thanks for having me. It's an honor.
All right, so we have to start with your story. And I love where you said, I'm good with talking about everything raw and real. And so tell us what happened with your husband.
Yeah.
And then how it impacted the whole family and then what's happened with him.
Yeah, I think when you think about tick-borne illness, right, a lot of people say, oh, you get the summer flu, you get a rash, you get these immediate symptoms. And in the case of our journey, that was just not the case, right? So my husband's journey started Really more with kind of mood disorders. He was irritable, he was depressed, he was argumentative. Like we had a fantastic relationship. We were both engineers. We didn't really argue. We just debated and then figured it out, right? Like it was fabulous. And then all of a sudden we were fighting about everything. And we went to therapy and it helped, but not really. And he was a go-getter and always wanted to solve problems, but all of a sudden he wasn't engaging, and he was super social, but he was withdrawing. And he was older than I was, and we had younger children. And so he had decided that he was going to step back from his career and support me and be Mr. Mom. And I was like, please go back to work. This is not working. What's going on? But then he just wasn't doing things in the way that I knew him. And so, like I said, went to therapy, didn't help. And then I started realizing that he was also forgetting things and that there were memory issues. And he was a brilliant engineer, electrical engineering, computer scientist. Like, as you said, I went to MIT, so I know really smart people. And he was one of the most brilliant people that I've ever met. And he just had this beautiful mind that was a mixture of creativity because he was a musician and engineering. And it was like fascinating. And all of a sudden, he was forgetting basic things. Like he couldn't remember the time to pick up the kids from daycare, even though it was the same every day. And I think one of the first times I realized something was really wrong was I got a call at work and the house alarm was blaring and the kids are crying and he's screaming and I'm like, what is going on? The alarm system's broken. And then as I put it all together, I realized he couldn't remember the code to shut off the
Oh,
alarm. And I was like, that was the first time that like a light bulb went off. Something's not right. And then I started watching and learning, and I realized that he was forgetting things. And that was a lot of the basis of the argument. It's like the basic thing. I told you that. No, you didn't. Yes, I did. No, you didn't. And you're like, wait a
hmm
second. And then, of course, he was very combative and argumentative, and I had to convince him that something was wrong, which was not easy. And as I started researching and figuring it out, Lyme disease came up in my searches, and it made sense because my husband was a hunter. He'd lived in multiple endemic areas. He was always doing our landscaping. He'd had multiple tick bites. And so we went to the doctor, and at literally the first visit, I was like, test him for Lyme disease. And unfortunately, as we'll talk more about, the testing is terrible, and he tested negative and didn't meet the criteria for the current standard of care. And to make a long story short, because I know you've read some of it in the book, they referred us to neurology, and he was given a diagnosis of early onset Alzheimer's disease. And to make matters worse, when they did his PET scan and imaged his brain, they found that his brain was in a condition or a state that was consistent with late stage disease. So I was still trying to convince him that something was wrong, and he was still arguing with me. And the doctors are telling me he was in the late stages of Alzheimer's. And I was like, whoa, like,
Yeah.
how did I get here? He was, again, older, but he was still 59, 60 years old. And he was declining so quickly. And so that was how it all started. And it was another 15 months before we returned to the possibility of tick-borne disease. We went from neurologist to neurologist. And again, I'm an engineer, right? I like root causes and I like to understand. And I'm like, why is this happening? He had no genetic predisposition. He had no comorbidities. He ate the Mediterranean diet and did all the things that you're supposed to do for brain health, right? And yet he was plummeting. And I'm like, what is going on? And again, 15 months after that first appointment, we revisited tick-borne illness. And not only was he positive for Lyme disease, but he was also positive for two common co-infections, Bartonella and Babesia. And it felt validating, but also completely devastating because you're like, why? That was where I started, right? Like,
Yeah.
why
Why
did
now?
I have to go through this crazy journey and lose all this time while his brain is systematically destroying
Yeah.
itself? And that was how it all started. And that's Nicole Malachowski, who's a big advocate for tick-borne disease. We all get recruited into this because of a tick.
Yeah. And I think the because I can't remember if I've talked about this on air before, but I came up also with it's a quote negative, right?
Yes.
Because you have to have a certain amount of bands
Mhm.
positive in the testing. And one of them was double positive, and that was for what did I just said it earlier. For the,
Well, there's multiple proteins that come in the
yeah,
bands, and so
this
and some of them are specific for Borrelia. Some of them can
Borrelia.
be,
I don't know why I
yeah,
couldn't think of it.
yeah.
Yeah, it
Some
was
of them can be a
specific.
little bit more non-specific. So you have to. It's not a great technique, to be honest.
No, that's why we're
Yeah.
going to talk extensively about the testing and the differences. But I had double positive for Borrelia, which is that's Lyme. And then a couple others that we're not sure. There's
Yeah.
something, but not sure. So I was technically CDC negative,
Yes.
but luckily I had a doctor at the time that said we need to treat off of symptoms. And there were so many for 11 years and different types. And that's what's so difficult to try to pinpoint because normal doctors and the information is so bad out there that if you live in certain states, you don't have Lyme. And that is the biggest fallacy out there. Lyme is everywhere,
Yeah.
everywhere. And I was in Montana. The first time was definitely Montana, out hiking around with my hunter husband at the time, clearing away brush, making your trails. The second time was in Arizona. But everybody says, no, it's East Coast. It's East Coast. That's where it is. So again, just so many fallacies that we need to debunk here,
Yeah.
these things, and get the proper information out here. So Lyme is everywhere, people. And just because if you do the base test, which is Western blot, correct? What we're talking
It's
about here, don't stop there. If it's just quote CDC negative, you keep going or you use the test that Nicole's going to talk about because up to 60% of early stage Lyme is missed through traditional testing. And with your husband's story, 15 months gone and
yeah.
the progression is so rapid, like you said,
Mhm.
that could have been who knows what could have happened, right?
Yeah.
But we don't know what we don't know at the time. Usually, if this is something that's just coming to you for the first time, you don't know what you're dealing with. And
Yeah.
like you started from ground zero and then had to go back to ground zero. For those who I want to talk here as if because most people likely have not read the book. So I don't want to talk like since I've read this and go from that. So I want to ask questions that other
Sure.
people will want to hear as well. Within that 15-month period, what happened? Did you go to other specialists to try to find out what was happening? And what was it that drew you back to
Yeah.
the ground zero for the tick
Tick-borne
infection?
illness. Yeah. So yes, we went from basically neurologist to neurologist trying to find answers because again, like I said, I was like, this doesn't make sense. I don't understand. And and when I don't understand, I ask lots of questions. And it turns out a lot of doctors don't like that. So we just kept
Truth.
going and I kept asking for testing and asking for more information. And I kept going and I wasn't getting any answers. And everything that I had him tested for came back negative or quote unquote normal. And honestly, I had pretty much given up. In fact, it was my husband who, even though he was systematically losing his mind, was very thoughtful and look, if this is going to happen, like we need to plan. We had two young children and we need to figure this out and we need to focus on what's going to happen and how we're going to deal with this. And then my brother called me one morning and was basically like, actually, it was my mom. She was like, you need to talk to your brother. And I'm like, okay. And we were not super close. We were always friendly, but he was a little older and lived in a different area. And so he called me and was like, I think you need to get Russ tested for Lyme disease. And I was like, yeah, I did. And he tested negative. And he was like, his wife at the time was having all sorts of health issues and hers presented completely differently than Russ's, which is another thing people need to understand about tick-borne pathogens is that the symptom manifestations can vary pretty dramatically.
Absolutely.
And so after her long journey in trying to get diagnosed, they finally figured out that she also had Lyme and multiple co-infections. And so he's a doctor, my brother, and he started researching and he found all the linkages to cognitive disorders and dementias and he started researching and so I think you need to revisit this because guess what, the testing is really bad. And so even though he tested negative doesn't mean that he doesn't have this going on. And then also there's all these other co-infections that we didn't even know about, and you need to look for those. And so he was the one that really convinced me to revisit tick-borne illness. And we went to a tick-borne specialist and really ran a full panel of stuff. And it was like, I couldn't believe the number of things that were wrong with my husband when we took a more functional medicine approach and went to a specialist. And it was like all of a sudden I had pages and pages of lab work that were telling us everything that was wrong. Meanwhile, I had just spent 15 months with doctors telling me he was fine. And like I said, that was when we figured out that he had not only Borrelia, the bacteria causing Lyme disease, but also Bartonella and Babesia, which are extremely common co-infections.
Yeah, they are.
And so and as I said, it felt validating and devastating at the same time, because by the end of the day, it's pathogens are treatable. Alzheimer's is not. And so we had hope, but a lot of damage had been done in the meantime. And that was where we ended up.
Yeah. Let's talk first about the impact on the family, because I think people with chronic illness, and especially something like this, I always say, I think it was one of the big killers of my really good relationship, because everything, when I did get diagnosed, became Lyme. And I joked around earlier, like what I said to you, it was like, oh, I have gray hair. It's Lyme. It's Lyme. Everything was Lyme. I don't feel good. And you're in this stage of you don't feel good, especially when you're trying to get treated and not knowing genetically that my detox systems were so poor. It was very, very difficult for me to remove the toxins that we were trying to kill off. So the Hersheimer reaction for me was brutal. And I want to also talk about the different treatment options and everything, but it's for the people around the person that has the illness. It's so brutal because you have to hear this. Now, I was cognitively fine, so I was constantly complaining that I felt like shit and just miserable. And the people, you don't get it unless, I would say, you don't get it unless you've lived it. So you're coming from the caregiver side. So talk a bit about what it's like on the side of the loved ones. And you had young kids, how this affected them, because that really, when I read about that in the book, that was, it really, your heart hurts.
Yeah.
So if you wouldn't mind talking about some of that.
No, I think that you don't realize how much things and these pathogens can really mess with somebody's, not just not feeling well, but just the way you are and your personality, especially when you have neurological symptoms, right? I talk about it in the book. It's really, you like to think that we all have free will and we can control our behavior and that we can control the way that we are. But we're really just big balls of biochemical reactions that happen, and that massively influences who we are. Just think about it for a more relatable level. I'm a female and there's a lot of hormones that go up and down, right? And some days I'm really sweet and some days I'm not so sweet. And that's all biochemistry. But with infection with my husband, like it was causing him to be like nasty and rude and mean, and it was causing him to hallucinate, right? This very logical, very methodical engineer came in one day and told me that there was a man swinging from the trees in the woods behind my house with a machine gun. And I'm like, what? Like, what do you like? You can't even fathom the difference. And it was so real to him. Like it was real. There were these people that were living. Part of the what lurks in the woods was not only the tick, but like he literally thought people were living in my woods trying to kill us. And in the paranoia and the anxiety and all of the things that he was living with on a regular basis were devastating, right, to the family, because you can't, you like to think of your home as a place of peace and comfort. And I was trying, as you said, to raise two young children, and you want them to feel safe. And their father is running around telling them that there's people trying to kill us. Can you imagine what that's like for a 5-year-old?
No, cannot fathom.
And so it really just, it hijacks, and it can change who you are. And I've seen this now that I do this for a living. I hear so many stories where people literally change in front of your eyes. And so it gave me a whole new view of mental illness and of frankly of chronic illness, because all of a sudden you can be doing all the things. Like longevity is really big right now. And it's like you can eat well, you can exercise, you can avoid chemicals and toxins and so forth. But like these pathogens, if you have them on board and you're not, your immune system's not keeping them at bay, they can literally change who you are. And my
They will.
husband, who was so logical and so different before this disease, I watched him change in front of my eyes, and I never would have guessed or predicted that in my previous state in learning. And that's what has made me so passionate about this, is because when you see somebody change like that right in front of your eyes, you're like, wow, this was completely preventable. Right?
Yeah.
If we had known which pathogens were on board early, and if we had treated them, and if we had taken care of this before it became a complete hot mess, then he'd still be with us today. Because, spoiler alert, my husband didn't survive and he passed away in 2022. And so that is, again, a lot of people have tick-borne illness and Lyme disease, this mental model. And what I realized in my personal experience is that it doesn't fit any model. Some people have cardiac symptoms. Some people have joint symptoms. Some people have neurological symptoms. Some people have hormone dysregulation. Some people have gut issues. Like, it's all over the map. And that's part of the problem in the medical community. It can't possibly cause all of those conditions. And yeah, it can.
Yeah,
You know?
all of them. It can all of them at the same time. That's what I experienced. I went to the endocrinologist who she told me, just, oh, take this T4, take the levothyroxine, and you'll be fine. Yeah. The cardiac stuff was crazy. So I went to the heart specialist, did the stress echo, everything, and they said, you're fine. We can't even get you to max out there, and your heart looks amazing. We don't know what it is. You're fine. And I said, I'm gaining weight, like nothing. I put on 17 pounds. It was just crazy. And they said, just keep working out like you do, and eat you do, and it will come off. Like that's what they were attributing it to. But yet I'm waking up in the middle of the night with a rapid heart rate of 162 beats, sleeping.
Yeah.
Saying to my husband the first time it happened, I'm having a heart attack. He said, you're not having a heart attack. You can't breathe. I need to go to the hospital. And they go, we don't know what's wrong. You wear the Holter monitor. These are the cardiac. And then the second time it was the joint. So you combine all that, and then you're going to the orthopedic, right? So it's, I know, all of these specialists.
They never talk to each other.
Nobody talks to each other. And then your practitioner, your main practitioner that you're using, is trying to connect these dots, but nobody, not one time, said Lyme. And I found it on a Facebook group for, oh gosh, what was it? Oh, autoimmune, because I had developed autoimmune conditions in the meantime. The leaky gut, and I know you talk about that in your book, but all of these things. And it's maddening that nobody could put it together. But I found this on the autoimmune page on Facebook, and people talking about Lyme. And I thought, I remember texting my doctor. I was actually had retired from law enforcement at the time and was coaching out of her office. And I texted her and I said, I seem to have some symptoms of this Lyme. And she said, oh my God, I never thought about it. She said, I have Lyme. And I don't know why I never thought about this.
Oh my goodness.
And she also picked it up in Arizona years prior. Teeth issues, never had tooth issues. All of a sudden, these dental issues. And she said, Susan, I've lost 5 teeth because Lyme loves to get into teeth, underneath teeth. Had no idea. Yeah. And so she had me do the Horowitz test online, Dr. Horowitz.
The questionnaire,
the questionnaire. And I came and I think it's 9 as a heads up. And she said, you have 22 of these checked. We have to look at this. And then as we talked about the testing, that went from there. But to think that here's your husband with all of these different symptoms for all of this time, and all this allowed for was for this to take hold even more.
Yeah. And then we're similar. We're in North Carolina, right? So a lot of people don't think about it. And I remember even after he was diagnosed, and I knew what was wrong with him. And he was approaching end of life, and he'd get admitted to the hospital for having seizure activity and other things. And I would talk about his medical history and his infections. And I remember, I'll never forget this. This is at Duke, not to throw Duke's my alma mater. It's March Madness, go Blue Devils. But like at
Roll Tide.
Yeah, I know. And this neurologist at Duke, I'm starting talking about Lyme disease and Bartonella and Babesia, and she's looking at me like I'm crazy. And at this point, I had been in the research, and I'm like, no, there's like real science, and that's the challenge. Is a lot of people don't realize there's real reasons why these pathogens cause such diverse symptoms. There's real physiology and microbiology and biochemistry. And I knew enough at the time to know, you know what, I'm not crazy. This is not something that I'm this crazy person saying that everything is Lyme and so forth. It's more complicated than that, but there's real science that shows that these pathogens can wreak havoc. And I'm stubborn. I'm really stubborn. So I donated his brain to scientists that are exploring the role between these pathogens and Alzheimer's. And I now have, hopefully it'll be published this year, we have images of Borrelia in his brain. I have PCR results showing Babesia in his brain, and a strain of Babesia that up until a few years ago was only thought to be in deer. And guess what? It's more than that. And it's in my husband's brain, and it's in high abundance in Pennsylvania, where he used to be a deer hunter, right? So all of the things fit. And so I think there's an emerging understanding, and I think actually COVID in some ways was good for this community, because it really normalized this concept of infection-associated chronic illness, and the fact that an infection can lead to long-term symptoms, but the understandings of the whys and the hows, and then most importantly, how to get it better, is still something that's in process, right? Yeah. But to me, one of the things my founder, one of Galaxy's founders, Dr. Ed Breischwart, who's a professor of veterinary medicine over at NC State, what better place to study tick-borne pathogens than veterinary work, because 100%. They're on the front lines, right?
They are.
And so he always said, there's no kind of form of therapy than an accurate diagnosis. And I really take that to heart, because if you don't know what you're treating, you're never going to get well. Because guess what? My husband had 3 infections. All 3 of those have different courses of treatment. Borrelia and Bartonella are bacteria, and so they're antibiotics, but they're different antibiotics. And then Babesia is a parasite. So that treatment is more like malaria than it is an antibiotic. And so if you don't know what you're fighting, you're never going to win the battle. And again, a lot of these pathogens lead to these non-specific symptoms that are really difficult to diagnose. And so expecting a doctor, even a functional medicine doctor that can spend hours with you to get that right is not fair to the clinician. Right. That's putting so much burden. And we've talked to experts. We work with some of the best right on the front lines of tick-borne disease, and we are honored to learn from them. But even some of those most experienced clinicians are like, I know this is Bartonella. It's all the classic symptoms of Bartonella. And then we run the test and it's Babesia. And it's too hard. And so it's not realistic for us to expect that clinicians are going to be able to figure this out based upon the complex symptoms. And like you said, it's not just pathogens, it's exposures and epigenetics and natural genetics and other things. And testing is the answer to get to help people get faster and early. The earlier, the better, because the longer it takes root in your tissues and in your body, the harder it is to get that treatment.
Absolutely. Do you have any idea how long he had it? He might have had it.
Oh, I rack my brain about this all the time. I think it was years. He had early symptoms. I started realizing he was sick in like 2016 was when I was like, this is more than just something to go to therapy for. This is something really wrong. But I remember even before my son was born in 2010, he had a panic attack at work and never had a panic attack before. And we went to the cardiologist, and the cardiologist was like, just let us know if it happens again.
See, people like us, like out of the blue, to have this, but the heart rate up and you can't breathe. And you're like,
yeah. All of a sudden, never had it before, and then
Wow.
had it. And then when my son was 18 months old, so, this was 2011, he went to daycare and got hand, foot, and mouth. And I remember, and I was fine, and my husband got it. And I remember reading about it, and it was like, adults usually don't get it unless they have a weakened immune system.
Uh-huh.
And I was like, what was weakening it? And I remember at the time thinking, why is he weakening? Why does he have a weak immune system? He seems super healthy. What's going on? And then now in retrospect, I'm like, oh, like there was his body was likely fighting something. And I think it was on board for maybe a decade before it became. And that's one of the things that is difficult is these are stealth infections. You get something like COVID and you got sick and you're down for the count. And for some people with these tick-borne illnesses, that happens too. But for other people, it's these pathogens are stealthy, which means they're in low quantities. They replicate slowly, and they also have so many biochemical pathways that actively evade and suppress the immune system. Like when you really dig into the science, these are sneaky little buggers. They like literally excrete cytokines and biochemistry that tells your immune system nothing's here, look elsewhere. They actively manipulate the immune system, and there's so much good research that has shown this. And so for some people, it goes under the radar and it's like a little smoldering fire. And you might have minor symptoms. You might have a panic attack. You might be irritable. You might be tired or have some joint pain. But who isn't these days? What adult at this point doesn't have some sort of, I'm tired, I have aches and pains.
They chalk it up to age.
Right.
That's what they say. I'm just getting older. It hurts to get out of bed. Sorry, people. Aging doesn't mean that you get out of bed when you're in your 50s or 60s and you automatically hurt. There's a reason for it.
Yeah. No, I couldn't agree more. It's like symptoms are your body's way of telling you something, right? Brain fog. Oh, I can't figure out this thing. And so there are natural things that happen, but there's also root causes that are signs. And that is part of the challenge in this space. And so I think it was on board for a long time. I think that, and we see this clinically all the time, where patients have all of a sudden, maybe they're pretty healthy, maybe they're not ready to go run marathons or do whatever, not many of us are, but then all of a sudden something happens. They get an infection, they have a traumatic accident, they have a surgery, they have a really stressful period, maybe they get divorced, and then all of a sudden, boom, bedbound or massive symptoms. And that happens a lot. It's like the immune system's a tipping point, and it can keep a lot of these infections at bay. And then all of a sudden the tipping point happens, the bucket overflows, whatever analogy you want to use, and now you're sick. Yeah.
If you bring the epigenetic part into it, or genetics themselves, think about if you have variants around the inflammatory SNPs, IL-6, TNF alpha, that are really driven with infection.
Yes.
And it's you want to talk about rusting the cells in the body. It just wreaks havoc.
Yeah.
MTHFR not being great with detox, glutathione system issues. And I had chalk all of these things up to that. And so as you're talking here, I'm just sitting here, God, this is just sounding so familiar to me, because I so remember I would go, and I was CrossFitting at the time. Granted, I was doing it at the wrong time of day for my body genetically. So I was already taxed. And here I'm dealing with this chronic infection twice that I had no idea I had. Yeah. And I was tired. And then in a very stressful job as a cop.
Yes.
I was so fatigued.
Yeah.
And recovery, forget about it. Like it would take me days to recover. Even living where I live now, I can handle things for a certain period of time. And then I know I can activate this if I don't recover. If I don't recover well, you can flare things back up. But it's just really hitting home for me, everything you're talking about, because I lived it. Let's, before we talk about the testing, talk while we're still on the topic of your husband. Talk about what treatment you did. And then I think one of the most compelling parts that I read was when he went into, was it like a dementia unit? I'm not sure how to
memory
term
care.
it.
Yeah.
Yeah. that you chose to not have the kids see him that way because he wanted to be remembered as who he was, not who the shell of who he had become for them. So these are decisions. When I asked you about like how does this impact the family, this is how deep it goes. Like, how much do you want the children to see this? How do they want to remember a parent? How much do you expose them to when they're that young? To where it's not creating, like, how much stress do you want to expose them to is I guess what I'm trying to say. So if you could just touch on that kind of where things went when you discovered the treatment and then how you dealt with it. And then I think let's get into the testing because it's so important.
Yeah, so for treatment, he was on a lot of stuff. And I think we went to a physician that really treated pretty aggressively with broad spectrum antibiotics. But then also looked at supporting the immune system and integrating herbal therapies. And so the treatment was intense. As I look back, I'm like, was it too intense? Should we take in a more slow approach? And I know you just had Dr. Rawls on, and he and I have debated, like, because the herbals versus the antibiotics, and I still don't know the answer. I really don't. Like, what's the right approach for early stage disease, for late stage disease? I think those things will play out as we learn and as good testing shows what people actually have.
And I think the individual, like looking at each person as individual, what are your detox pathways like? What are you able to handle? Because for some, and I see this just with clients just coming on working on a protocol with me, whether it's food, supplements, any of that, like, I don't want to overload them with too much if they can't handle it. And people are out there just pulling things off the internet, right? Or off of podcasts. Let me try this and this because it's supposed to be good. And they're overloading the system and causing worse things to happen. So it's just, I think the same with Lyme. If you overtreat with something, like, more isn't necessarily better, but it's depending on the ability of the person to be able to handle it. And I think we have to look at that on such an individual level. Okay.
And one of the things I talk about in the book is one of the reasons I left our original doctor was he wanted to treat him for Babesia. And I wasn't really sure at the time if he had Babesia because he was antibody positive, but he was direct detection negative. And he just didn't have some of the classic symptoms. And I could talk about this for a whole nother podcast. And then also I knew people who had been on that treatment and it was really difficult. The one that he was recommending with Metpron and so forth. And my sister-in-law, who I said was going through a parallel journey, like she was like, it almost killed me. And I was like, he can't take it. He was so fragile. He was, as you mentioned, herxing. And every time he would go on antibiotics, he couldn't remember where he was. And it was like I was on constant damage control. He would put his keys down somewhere and 5 minutes later, he'd be frantic about not being able to find them. And it was like I was running around damage control all the time. And so I walked away from the Babesia treatment and we went another path. And as it turns out, we were both right. I didn't think he had Babesia. The doctor thought this was this. And it turns out, like I said, he had a strain of Babesia that I was reading the research and I'm like, he doesn't have these symptoms because he was diagnosed with Babesia duncani, but he was done that through antibodies and the symptoms of that are different. And then this is a different type of Babesia. And I know this is getting really technical, but that's a different type of Babesia that behaves very differently in the body. And it was like, crap, maybe it was holding him back because we never adequately treated for that. And again, this is where I go after. It's like, there's no better form of therapy than an accurate diagnosis. If I had known that at the time, then we would have been able to potentially treat him in a different way. And I still don't know. Like people ask me about treatment all the time and I'm like, look, diagnostics is enough for me to handle. I'm going to rely upon other people to figure that out. And like I said, my job is to tell them what they're treating so that they know, because they're different. But about the memory care and seeing my kids and having my kids see him, some of that decision was made for us because I put him into memory care in May of 2019. And I was visiting him. I stepped away from my job and I was visiting him every day. And then my kids would go every weekend. And then I started going a little less because I could tell it was a little traumatic on my son. He was like noticing the smells and the crazy environment in memory care. And I'm like, maybe this isn't the greatest thing for him to do. And I want him to see him, but maybe not as much. But then COVID came. right? And then it was on lockdown and we couldn't see him. And I couldn't, like, I used to go there and help him with his bathing and other things that he wasn't comfortable having staff do, right? There's a lot of pride that people have, and you
Sure.
don't want somebody to
Sure.
help you shower, but having your wife help you is a little bit different. But I couldn't do that anymore. And he declined really quickly and he became combative and they had to put him in a psychiatric institution and then they over medicated him. It was a mess and I couldn't see anything. Like they had to ship him to a psychiatric institution. I couldn't go tour the place to see. And like you can imagine all the videos and images I have in my head because of the TV that you watch, you've never been. And you're like, where are they sending him? I don't know. I can't find out. And it was awful. And on the other end of that, he was completely a different person. Like he couldn't engage. He wouldn't even get on Zoom with me because he was like, that can't be my wife. My wife is dead. She's,
Wow.
that's what his brain had told himself. And that's how he justified it. And it's so he wouldn't get on the Zoom and he wouldn't see me because that's not my wife. She's dead. She's not here. And so when I finally could see him again after COVID, he was a shell of the person that he was. He was still pretty. When the last time my kids saw him, I remember it was a Valentine's party in 2019 or 2020, sorry. And then on the other and so he was still dancing and doing all the things. And then on the other side, he was in a wheelchair. He couldn't speak. He was hunched over. He was awful. And I'm like, I don't want my kids to remember him this way. My husband wouldn't want them to see. He never wanted to be that way. His solution was like, you just kill me. And I'm like, I can't do that.
Yeah, that's not going to happen.
It's not going to happen. But that's what he wanted, right? He's just kill me. Like, I don't want to be a burden. And I'm like, unfortunately, sometimes we're more humane to our pets than we are to people. And I can't do that, babe. And it was awful. Anybody who's lived with somebody with dementia, it is a brutal way to go. And
It is.
But he finally was at peace, and then you think you're prepared, and it's like losing them all over again because there's a lot of grieving that occurs as part of the journey. And that was one of the reasons I wrote the book, is I had to make sense of it all. I had to get it out. Oh my gosh, in so many ways. Like I wouldn't be able to talk about the things that I do if I hadn't done that work.
I think you feel that as you read the book. You feel how it's this purge of everything you're going through and just so real.
It was spawned out of my journals. I started journaling and just writing it down. That's why there's so much detail and richness in it, because I was literally writing it like, I got to get this out of my head because I'm literally going crazy. And it was like, it's so much chaos living in this environment. And it was, I tell people all the time, I've done a lot of hard things. As you mentioned, I went to MIT, I went to Duke, I've been doing startups and entrepreneurships and launched new innovations into the world. And like nothing has been as hard as being a caregiver, like nothing.
No,
it's not even on the same scale. No, it was just, and it shows you who you are, breaks you down. I was crying in the back of my closet on a regular basis, and it's all in there because that's the reality of what happens. And I don't think there's enough, and I can't tell you how many people have read the book and it was like, thank you, because I felt like I was so alone. And it's nice to know, as much as it hurts to know, it's nice to know that there's somebody else that's going through this and that I'm not crazy. And anyways, that's the journey.
Dementia is a tough one. My dad had dementia, and the last time I saw him, and I did it from afar. So you're living with this person.
Yes.
And even when you put them somewhere, this is funny, but when I put him in the first home, he agreed to go. And we took his bumper pool table, which he loved. It was a home-based. There were only 4 other residents there. So we thought that would be best for him, the most comfortable. And he was there about 3 days later. He lived in Florida. I was in Montana, and I get a call from them, and they said he took a cab and went home. I said, he was like, I'm not going back to that goddamn place. There are old people there. And I'm like, Dad, you're old. I mean, I'm 60 now, and I'm going, geez, he was only in his 70s. It's not that far off. But and then when I went down to see him, I actually decided I have to sell the house because these are the things you have to do as a caregiver. It said it's not safe for him. He can't be there. So I sold the house and found another place he agreed to that had a dementia lockdown so that he couldn't call a cab and go home. And went down to see him, and he had no idea who I was. And that like you said, you're just seeing these changes happen. And then the next day I went in and he looked at me, he's, you're my daughter. The
You know?
emotions of the caregiver, one day they don't know who you are. The next day they know who you are, but they're still a shell of who they
Yeah.
were.
Yeah.
And it is a very, and this is any chronic illness, but especially when you have one that is Alzheimer's, dementia, any of this, to see them, these loved ones, go through and know that there's nothing you can do.
Yeah.
There's nothing. You just have to have other professionals help them, because the stress on you, and again, like even as you're now, I don't know who's watching this and who's listening. Most of my people listen and not YouTube for the most part, but you can see it. Like the emotion is still so raw in you when you
Yeah.
talk. You see it come up like in your body language,
Yeah.
deep. And I don't think that ever leaves us, no matter how long it is. And when they do pass, I remember a friend of mine said, this was right after, they said, well, you knew he was going to die anyway. And I said, that's not the point. You do
Yeah.
lose them again. Now you have the first grieving process, and then you grieve again when they're actually gone. And even though they were in somewhere and the communication was nothing at that point, you still knew they were there.
Yeah. You lose them
And
again. You really, and I thought I
a
was
whole
prepared
other,
and I thought that it was, I
never.
lost him a long time ago and all, but no, you do, you lose them for a second time.
Yeah.
And it's just, it's interesting and it's hard to explain, but it's the truth.
Yes. Again, unless you've been through it, whether you're the person with a chronic illness or the caretaker, if you haven't experienced these things, you can't truly understand the emotions that person is dealing
Yeah.
with.
Yeah.
Okay, so let's talk about testing. This is the
Yes.
reason we're here, but your story, again, it was just, I thank you for telling it again, because I know you've told this story so many times, including in the book, and it is not easy to rehash over and over. So thank you for your candid
Yeah.
telling. Testing, like we said, up to 60% of early stage Lyme missed in traditional testing. So what I'd
Yes.
like you to do is talk a bit about the traditional testing, and then what you're doing at Galaxy.
Yeah.
The real testing, the good quality testing, so that people don't have to go through things like your husband, I, and so many other people have had to deal with because of terrible testing.
Yeah, so this was something it took me a while to get my head around because like I said, I'm an engineer, I'm a scientist, I like answers and you trust in the science, right? And but there's reasons why when people say the testing is bad, why is that the case? So taking a step back, the challenge is, like I said earlier, these are stealth pathogens, right? That hide and that are in low copy numbers and they evade the immune system. And so as a result, the only testing that we've really had, the current standard of care, is not looking for the pathogen itself. Like if you want to know if you have COVID, right? You get a PCR test or you get an antigen
Mhm.
test. And that tells you, do you have COVID? In Lyme, that doesn't exist. It didn't exist because it was just not sensitive enough. And so what's happened is that they use antibody testing, right? It's like your immune system response to the pathogen. And do you have antibodies to that particular pathogen? But that's complicated for a lot of reasons. The first thing is you think about an immune response, right? It takes a while for antibodies to develop, right? You get a pathogen, it takes a while for your immune system to respond and to produce antibodies. And first it produces one type of antibodies, then it switches to another type of antibodies. And so it takes a while and it can be 4 to 6 weeks before those antibodies get to a high enough level that you can detect them with the current standard of care. And the problem is all of the research in the literature shows that even a 30-day delay of diagnosis makes it over 2 times more likely that you're going to have chronic symptoms after treatment. So if I get diagnosed correctly on day 1, you're going to have a much better chance of getting better with the standard of care treatment than if you get diagnosed on day 40. And
Yeah.
antibody testing misses that early window. And actually the numbers, there was a study that was published by Bay Area Lyme. For 10 years, they were monitoring patient performance and the performance of these diagnostics, and only 23% were accurately diagnosed at the acute stage. So it's even more than 60%.
Wow.
23% are accurately diagnosed. So 77% of the early stage patients on their paper were missed. So that early window where treatment is most effective, antibodies suck. I mean,
Yeah.
that's the answer. And then if you read the traditional literature, it's much better in chronic stage disease. And then the antibody testing gets that much better. But again, that's based upon people that have been diagnosed. So it's
Yeah.
like you already know the answer. What we've seen in the research in both animals and humans is there's patients like you and patients like my husband that they have the pathogen on board, but because they're so sick, they're not mounting a proper antibody response. So my husband had the pathogen. I have pictures of it in his brain, right? But he tested negative on the antibody based test because if you actually look at his overall antibody titers, they were low because his immune system was suppressed and dysregulated because it had been fighting these pathogens for, as I said, potentially a decade, right?
Mhm.
And so even in chronic stage disease, where a lot of doctors will tell you, no, it's very accurate within this test. No, that's based upon people that have tested positive, right? So they're testing the test against other people that have already tested positive. And so some of these patients, and they've shown it, Monica Embers at Tulane has shown in monkeys that even with taking a very known strain of the bacteria and putting it in different monkeys, some have a really robust antibody response and some have no antibodies. Even though at necropsy, when the animal dies, they clearly are infected, but they've had no antibody response or a very transient one. And so that's the other reason antibodies are flawed. Even in chronic disease, some people just don't have them. And then the third reason antibody testing, because there's many, but there's only three I'll talk about, is that if you know you have Lyme and you get treated for Lyme, but you still feel terrible, then the question is, do I still feel terrible because I still have an active infection, which has been proven in the research? Am I feeling terrible because the pathogen caused a lot of really bad immune dysregulation when it was on board? Or do I have an undiagnosed co-infection? Or am I living in a moldy environment? Or all these things. And
Yeah.
so in that state, antibody testing isn't useful because if I test positive, I know I had Lyme and antibodies persist in your bloodstream for a long time. Like I have COVID antibodies, but I don't have COVID right now. And so it's not diagnostic. It's not telling you what's causing the root of your symptoms right now. And I could talk for a whole nother podcast about why antibody testing is limited because there's more reasons, but that's enough.
And is
And
it question? And
yeah,
isn't it also from what I've heard, the longer you go, the harder the testing is even less accurate because those bacteria will burrow in there further as well.
yeah, you can certainly have. So the bacteria can go dormant and go into these persister states. And in that case, it might be not causing a lot of symptomology, but it also isn't causing your immune system to respond. And so it's really, there's a lot of ways that it can be an insufficient approach, right? And so what on the other end of my journey with my husband, it was like, okay, this is really bad. Like I kept going back to that first doctor's appointment when I got that negative test result. And I'm like, what would life have been different if I had known differently at that time period? And so I started again digging into the research. And it's like they say on the wall of the FDA, in God we trust, all others bring data. So I started digging into the research. It's like there's got to be better solutions out there. And I came across the work of Dr. Breischwart at NC State and the work of at Galaxy. And what they were really focused on for Bartonella, and then also they had taken some technology out of George Mason University for Borrelia and Lyme. How do we actually directly detect these pathogens? How do we look and see, how can we get a test that is the right test that understands the microbiology and how these pathogens work? And then we have to make that test sensitive enough to actually pick it up. And so for Lyme, for example, Lyme doesn't like to be in the blood. It likes to be in tissues. It doesn't free circulate, and it's in extremely low quantities in the blood. And so blood-based testing really isn't the right answer. And so what the researchers at George Mason showed was that the pathogen actually sheds these proteins. And there's recent research and technology we've just gotten from Virginia Tech and Dr. Brandon Jutras that there's like a special like sugars on the bacterial cell wall that get shed into the environment. And those molecules get filtered through the kidneys and they aggregate in the urine and you pee them out. And it's, oh, we can actually use urine as a better matrix, and we can show these antigens, which are either proteins or sugar molecules that basically are specific to the pathogen and will tell you whether or not the pathogen's present. And so for Lyme at Galaxy, we do actually urine-based testing for antigens to show that the pathogen is present or not.
Oh,
and that's
fantastic.
a whole game changer, because we get all sorts of patients where they're antibody negative, but they're urine antigen positive. And especially it's great at early stage disease. And it's also really great for that chronic disease, that unknown state where, like I said, maybe you have a patient that had Lyme disease and has been treated and they still feel like crap. And it's why. And if you get a positive on the urine antigen test, you still have infection going on. So you need to really address that. And so that's what we do for Lyme disease. And for the co-infections for Babesia, Bartonella, and then we also test for Borrelia, which is Lyme, but there's also another part of Borrelia that's actually relapsing fever Borrelia, and that is in the blood. So that's a little technical, but it's not just as simple as one pathogen, right? Like even this pathogen with the same name can have very different forms in microbiology. And relapsing fever is spread by a different type of tick. It's the soft ticks rather than the hard ticks. And it actually is more blood-borne, and it relapses because it accelerates in numbers and causes these febrile and fever episodes. And so we have a co-infection panel that looks at, for those 3 pathogens, at the highest level, right? So there's all sorts of different species of these pathogens. And I know I'm getting technical, but
keep going.
There's Babesia, there's Babesia microti, there's Babesia duncani, there's Babesia odicoliae. And so if you're just screening for one of those, you might miss the other. And that was where my fail was with my husband, is he tested antibody positive for Babesia duncani, but he didn't actually have that. That was a cross reactivity of the antibody, because the antibodies are sometimes not specific either to the particular pathogen, or they're not specific to the particular species of the pathogen. So I now know from his postmortem results, he didn't have Babesia duncani, he had Babesia odicoliae, which actually behaves very differently in the body. And it's a sequestering Babesia. So he wasn't going to have the symptoms I was looking for, like fever and night sweat and other
sweating
things.
Yeah.
He didn't have any of it. And that's because it's a different kind of Babesia and it's a different pathogen. And
that would need to be treated a different way.
That's emerging science. But there's actually a clinical trial going on with Babesia treatments right now that 60 Degrees Pharmaceutical has going on. And we don't really know those answers, because up until a couple of years ago, they didn't even know Babesia odicoliae was a human disease. And now the research that Dr. Breischwart's doing is showing it in many common cases. And in fact, it's more common in the chronic population that he's testing. He doesn't see any Babesia duncani in his samples. And that doesn't mean it doesn't exist. It just means in the chronic patients he's looking at, he's seeing a lot more odicoliae and in divergens, which was thought to only be in Europe. And if you're only testing for one strain, you could miss. So what we do is we test at the genus level, which is going to capture them all. Right? It's like, it's, if you think of it as like a family name versus the individuals, the genus is the whole family, and the Hatfields and the McCoys, as opposed to like the individuals. And we do enrichment of the sample to concentrate it so that we can improve the sensitivity of the assay. And it's the approach that they've been using at NC State to discover a lot of these pathogens. And they've really not only shown the how it leads to chronic disease, but they've done prevalence studies showing that 65% of Bartonella patients, or of schizophrenia patients, test PCR positive for Bartonella.
You know what? I was going to actually go there, because as we're talking about your husband and his symptoms, I'm thinking, God, someone could really confuse that with schizophrenia.
Oh yeah.
Or some other, because I know MS, multiple sclerosis. I've heard some Parkinson's are actually their Lyme or co-infections.
Yeah.
And treated for that. Lo and behold, the symptoms, but it's how they're presenting.
Yeah.
And when the testing is not good, it goes right to, it has to be mental illness.
Yeah. Right. No, there is a linkage, and that whole avenue of study was actually started. It's just like in medicine, most things start with one patient. And so there was one patient It was a young boy. His identity is not disclosed, so we call him Michael, even though that's not his real name. And he had sudden onset psychosis, right? He was homicidal, he was suicidal. His parents
Wow.
had to institutionalize him, and they spent over $400,000 in psychiatric care. It's a crazy story. So Chris Newby, who's a fantastic writer, wrote about this story in kind of a long form journalism. So it's Google Swamp Boy. And because there was a comic book character, Swamp Boy, that was part of the story. And she did a fantastic job telling this story. But to make a long story short, sudden onset psychosis, parents, like, again, what we talked about as a caregiver, like destroying the family unit. And fortunately, an astute practitioner noticed these kind of like stretch marks on his trunk. And what we know in the research from
Telltale
Dr.
sign.
Breischwert's work is that's a telltale sign of Bartonella.
Yeah.
And so they connected the family with Dr. Breischwert, and they tested him with Galaxy methods and found out, yes, he was positive for Bartonella. They treated him with antibiotics, and all of a sudden, this kid got his life back. He went back to high school. He graduated valedictorian of his class. He went on to study at Ohio State University and institutionalized, right? To the
and
point, and
homicidal.
medicated to the point where he was
Jesus.
drooling. And all of a sudden, with a course of antibiotics and some treatment, he got his life back. And so that inspired Dr. Breischwert to do further studies, and they did a pilot study, which is where that 65%, they screened schizophrenia patients over at UNC and found that 65% of them were positive for Bartonella. And then they did a follow-on study with Columbia University and found that over 40% of patients with psychosis, which is a somewhat broader definition, also tested positive, and it was statistically significant over the control group. So it's like, how many of people are in mental institutions that could be
that
treated?
Don't need to be there. Yeah.
And that the other thing that I think is worth mentioning is that all of the symptoms with that young boy started when they adopted a cat, right? And Bartonella, cats are natural cat scratch fever. If you think about it in the acute form, cat scratch fever is Bartonella, but what people don't realize is that it has a lot of chronic conditions as well. And so they adopted a cat. And if you have a flea infestation in your house, that's also, it's not just ticks. We call it vector-borne disease, not tick-borne disease.
Hey, I was a hornet second time. Like who does this happen to? But it does.
Yes. It's if they're biting insects, then, and that doesn't mean that all pathogens can be transmitted by all vectors, but it's more than just ticks. And that was all related to a cat. And how many of us have cats in our house?
Yeah. That's why they don't go outside.
Yeah.
They stay in here. But I totally get it. If mine scratches me, the first thing, I'm in there, I'm cleaning that. I don't care if it's a little scratch, big scratch. These are things you think about that you don't think about it unless you've dealt with something in these things. I have one quick question for you on, and then I want to talk about Galaxy, a little bit more about Galaxy testing. But I've heard of people, two things. First of all, this one's not a question, but people saying, I never saw a tick. You don't have to see it. I didn't see it, right? The majority of people don't. And not everybody gets the bullseye. And then what about alpha-gal? Because that's like the biggest thing there is the allergy to meats. What if you're just like, I just don't feel good when I eat that? Are you going to, be able to connect that with a tick? There's just so many things here. But the other thing is, and I've heard this from a couple of people in the last few years saying, I got a tick bite. So I talked to my doctor and they just put me on antibiotics just in case.
Yeah.
There's I've never seen a tick on me. All of this time, never saw a tick on me. I was hiking up in Wyoming, and I might have talked about this on here prior, but I was brushing my teeth that night, and right in my trap, it was right up here in my trap, I leaned in, I'm like, when did I get that mole? Because I am out in the sun all the time. I'm like, oh, there's a sunspot. And I look, I'm like, oh, there's freaking legs there. And I'm the first time I've ever seen a tick on me. So immediately I'm in a panic because this was just a couple years ago, 3 years ago. Did exactly what you're supposed to do. Take the tweezers, don't tease it out so it can regurgitate. You go straight down, pull it straight out with the tweezers or a little tick remover tool, threw it in the sink, put it into a baggie because I just read something on a Facebook post about testing the tick. And I thought, I'll find somewhere. So I chose technology.com. And when I looked at the phone number to ask for questions, it was $35. And I thought, I want to find out because I don't want to do anything unless I actually know. But I'm in a panic. I didn't even sleep that night thinking, God, could third time be the charm here? Because it is such a panic when I see one or if I even see a tick. And they turned out they were just 20 minutes up the road from me. Fort Collins. And I said, do you have a drop box? They said, we do. I took that damn tick up there the next day and they tested for everything. So I didn't have to do anything. Yeah. But with the research you've read, you're aware of, what do you think about this? Because I'm going, do you really want to introduce an antibiotic into your system that you don't need? And just in case, while you wait, and we already know it's crappy testing, the general testing that most doctors know about. And then what if it's not Lyme, but a different infection that takes a different type of treatment? So we're just introducing more junk into the body unnecessarily. What's your thinking on that?
I think that overprescription of antibiotics is not the solution, right? Because one, like you said, it might not be treating the right pathogen. And so it does cover, now doxycycline does cover a lot of the pathogens that you can get from the tick, but not all. And so it's not going to touch Babesia, right? And so that's a problem. And also if you don't need it, then you're doing all sorts of damage to your gut.
Gut microbiome.
And it's not the right answer. That is a manifestation of a lot of bad testing. They give it prophylactically because they know that if it progresses to the point where you will test positive, then it might be too late. And so the answer is not just proactively just prescribing antibiotics, it's getting better testing. And the research shows that the antigen testing is effective at first sign of symptoms. And the work that is coming out of our collaborator at Northwestern University is showing that it's able to detect within days of the tick bite, right? So you can know definitively whether or not you've been infected. And so that's the better answer is actually getting accurate.
The proper testing.
So
is your testing and is Galaxy Diagnostics?
Yes.
So is it accessible? Is it through physician? Is it accessible like direct to consumer? Talk a bit about how people can get this testing. And it doesn't matter how long you've suspected. If you feel like you've had something is tick-borne,
get tested.
Get tested.
So so you can get, right now we're only through providers. So you can go to your doc, but it's pretty easy to sign up and you can any doctor can open up an account and get tested. If you have the ability to order testing, you can become a client, and we've got a fantastic support organization that can walk you through our testing and what we do. And it's one of the things I like about our Lyme testing is it's easy. It's as easy as peeing in a cup. You don't need phlebotomy, especially for kids. I've taken my son for phlebotomy and it was not fun. And kids, just like our animals, they're outside, they're rolling in the grass. I see people, I cringe every time I see people posting pictures of their kids jumping in leaf piles. I'm like, no.
Isn't it funny when you've dealt with this? I'm an avid hiker. I live in Colorado, avid hiker. And there's times when everything is so grown and you're going through, and there's through the trail, and all I think about, I'm like ticks. I have my hair all tied up and I'm literally, as I'm walking through, going like this, the lint roller,
the PTSD
all I think
is
about
real.
is ticks.
The PTSD is real. It's like the last chapter of my book. My son wanted to go walk in the woods and I'm like, it was like, I don't want to do it. Like it is something.
Ticky. It looks ticky.
Yeah, prevention is the number one way to protect yourself, right?
Yeah.
Bug spray. There's this great product from someone I've gotten to know, Tick Mitt, where you can it's like a little Velcro that you can put on your dog and yourself, and it picks off any ticks. And so there's lots of ways you can manage that, but the PTSD is real.
It is. And I swear by geranium essential oil. They hate it.
Yeah.
I was with a guy last year hiking. And I said, do you want some of this on you? And I joke around. I say, you're going to smell like a French hoe, but because it stinks. It's like a ladies' room. I don't like the floral, but I'll put my sunblock on. And then I literally take a few drops. I either make a spray or I take a few drops and I rub it all over me, on my boots, in my hair, because it's not going to harm anything, on my face, you name it. I don't leave anything untouched. And we went through this one area of bushes. Now, this is at 11, about 10, 11,000 feet at an alpine lake.
Yeah.
And we sat down on the rock and look, and there he's got a tick embedded in his leg. And he didn't put it on.
Yeah.
I didn't have anything. And I went through the same stuff as he did a total check, nothing. I swear, maybe it's an old wives' tale. I don't know, but I've had good results, and I did not use it when I hiked in Wyoming on that trail.
Yeah.
But so back to the providers only. So if you are suspecting this, say to your doctor, can you please order me this test? Go
and advocate, ask specifically for Galaxy, because I think the doctor will be like, oh, we use a test for Lyme. And it's difficult to sometimes stand up to doctors, and because you see them as the authority. And that's one of the goals or the challenges that I had as a caregiver, because it's the doctor should know better than me. And I try and tell people that are caregivers, it's like you said earlier, you need to advocate for yourself. And the research in this space is changing rapidly. And even though you're not an expert in all the things in medicine, you are an expert in you, and you are an expert in whoever you're caring for, way more so than the doctor. And you can stand up and say, no, I want this test, and here's why. And we have all sorts of resources on our website as to the whys that can help. And our founder has over 450 peer-reviewed publications.
Wow.
So their science is there. And the state of Lyme disease research, which you mentioned in my intro, that is a fantastic resource. I'm super proud of that effort that we put together. And I had a lot of great help from experts in the field, showing the science behind how these pathogens lead to chronic disease, why the testing is so flawed. You mentioned rash presentation. We walk through in that document, only 14% of patients get that classic bullseye rash, right? A lot of other people have these rashes that are really diffuse and off color, and the rates of misdiagnosis of those rashes is way more common. And then about 30% of people get no rash at all. Right? Everybody's, I don't have Lyme, I didn't get that bullseye rash. Guess what? Only 14% of people do when you look at the research. And so it's really critical to come armed. And I tell people to take that document and give it to their doctor if they don't believe that Lyme disease doesn't exist in their state, or that you need a rash, or that I had 2 weeks of doxycycline, so you can't possibly still have Lyme. You're cured, right? We talk
Nicole,
about in that document persistence of the organism and the research that shows that it can still live in your body.
Yeah.
And one of the reasons that we do our direct testing of Galaxy is to show, is it still active? Is it still in your body, or might it be something else? Because Lyme is complicated, and it's not necessarily as simple as in black and white as the standard traditional medicine might make you believe. So there's a lot of resources out there, and I would say definitely patients can ask. We have a lot of patient-initiated testing where doctors are like, I have no idea why I'm ordering this test, but my patient wants me to.
Wants it. That's why we're doing this podcast, to get the word out so you can ask for these things.
Yeah.
Basic testing. I'm trying to get my clients, this week's podcast I did myself on lipids, because there's so much bad information out there about cholesterol. The higher, the better. And unless you're looking at someone's genetics and you're looking at the deeper dive labs than just the basic stuff, you're missing the piece of the puzzle. And I have one is actually doing great now, but I have 3 people walking around. 2 of them actually high risk for a cardiovascular event anytime. If you would have looked just at the basic cholesterol test, you wouldn't have known that. So why is this any different? We have to do the deeper dives. And this is one of the purposes of having this conversation today, is to help people advocate for themselves. I don't know where the hell I'd be. I'd probably be with your husband.
Yeah.
If I didn't keep saying, I can't give up because something isn't right with me. Why are these things happening? And the more you understand your body, or have that awareness around your body. I think the majority eat crap. They're drinking alcohol. They're things that just take them further out of themselves. So
Yeah.
the awareness isn't very good. And it becomes the norm, the high stress, all of these situations, this becomes their norm.
Yeah.
So when something happens, it's, oh, I caught a bug. I caught a virus. It's COVID. Just all this junk. And it's the people that tend to be more tuned in saying, hey, I live this active life or healthy, I don't get sick. Why all of a sudden am I not feeling right? Something is off and you can't explain it. There's nothing. You haven't seen a tick. You haven't seen, but maybe you're outdoors, pets, people that let their pets sleep in their beds.
Yes.
Up on their furniture. They don't realize that if you have an outdoor pet, and again, I don't care where you live, there's ticks everywhere. People find them here in Colorado. I had friends that took their dogs out. This was last spring. And he's like, I came in, took 7 ticks off my dog out in the grass outside in my yard.
Yeah.
You have to be in the woods, right?
Yeah.
And then they come and they're sleeping in the beds. You don't think that those ticks can't get off of there.
Yeah.
Right? On the couches. There's so
Yeah.
No,
I tell it
locked out of my room. They're indoors, so they're not going to get any ticks, and they still get locked out of my room because I don't want them in my bed. There's blankets. The blankets get washed every week on the couch. Like, I'm super particular. Again, maybe it's part of that, like you said, that PTSD. But I don't want anything that could come from anything. I want that control, and maybe I go overboard. But I think you're just opening yourselves up. And especially they're under blankets with you. Oh gosh, under the sheets, and you don't know what's being.
Yeah, no, I tell a story
people.
I tell a story in the book where my daughter came straight out of her bedroom and she was really young and she was in a state where she didn't like to wear a shirt. So she came downstairs and she hugged my dog that was on the couch, and then she's sitting there eating her breakfast, and then she's, Mom, I feel something, and it feels like something's crawling on me. And so I looked and there was a tick that she hadn't been outside. It was just from the dog. And then my favorite story that I went up to DC for a CDC roundtable on vector-borne disease. And so I was staying in Maryland and at the Westin, and I'm getting ready to throw my suitcase in the minivan, and I'm doing things, and it was a sloped hill. And as I'm opening up the back of my minivan, my suitcase starts going down the sloped, parking lot.
Yeah.
And it goes all the way across the parking lot and it falls over on the curb. And so I'm laughing. I'm like, oh, this is funny. And I go over and I wheel it back over. But where it fell over the curb, there was a lot of grass. And again, because of my PTSD, I was like, oh, I'm like, and as I'm checking my suitcase, I'm like, you're crazy. The PTSD is, and I'm literally in my voice, like the voice in my head is, you're crazy. You're ridiculous. And then all of a sudden I saw a freaking little tick crawling across my suitcase. Like I wasn't hiking in the woods. I was in the parking lot of the Westin in Northern Virginia. And I'm like, wait a second. This is insane. So I think everybody has this feeling like you have to be in the deep woods. But the reality is we're more likely to be exposed in our backyards. We're more likely to be exposed in parks where we are. Absolutely. You don't have to be in the deep woods. I know there's a person that always does the North Carolina advocacy with us for the Center for Lyme Action. And he got infected in Charlotte, North Carolina, in the city. He's like, got out of my apartment and I went to the gym and I had a bullseye. I don't know where it happened, but it happened. It happens. It happens. Urban areas, parking lots.
I wasn't in the woods the second time. I was at a pool.
Yeah.
In Phoenix, a pool, and the Target ad on me. I will never forget. I was like, what bit me? When I saw it coming in and I went like that and it stung. Oh, it was awful. And then a few days later, it was beautifully perfect. Yeah. And I also journal. And so this was, again, years later when I got diagnosed, and I went back in my journal of 2012 into 2013, because it was October of 2012. You don't forget these things. It was right around my birthday. And by January, I was going, oh my God, I am so fatigued. I don't know what's wrong with me. And that's when all the connective tissue, the joint stuff. But I remember just reading that in my journal, and it was like, oh my God, how many years wasted here? But every day was worse. I'm so tired. I can't even think straight. Now I'm not sleeping. Now this is happening. And had no idea. And the doctors, I didn't go see anybody because I didn't think anything of it. I didn't know about Lyme at the time. And I'm from Jersey. Come on. But I still didn't know about Lyme.
Yeah.
And part of me even thinks this is also interesting. We used to play in the grass all the time.
Yeah.
And we're totally outdoors, lived at the beach, but in our yard, we had lots of grass. And I remember getting really sick when I was young.
Yeah.
And my parents take me to the doctor, antibiotics. I actually wonder, could I have been infected back then? Because
Yeah.
no one could figure out what it was. But when I look at your traditional Lyme symptoms, like you said, that people think you have, it was flu-like, it was the middle of the summer.
Yeah.
I really
Yeah.
wonder like how long some of this could have been in, and maybe it's been I don't know, but again, hindsight, right? If we knew what we knew,
Yep.
we are where we are. So if a doctor, once you're testing the patient that's looking for it, or if you are a provider, please get signed up to do the testing with Galaxy, because you never know when you're going to have someone come in and it just might be this missing piece to your puzzle. But we'll have that all in the show notes, correct? All your
Yes.
links for everything.
Yep.
Everything we've talked about, I know because I got all your information and there were several links in there. And the book, I got it on Amazon. What Lurks in the Woods. Again, it's emotional.
Yeah.
It chokes me up thinking about it. But it's just so written, so raw and impactful. And
No.
I think if you, or whether you're a caretaker or someone who's had chronic illness or something like Lyme or any of the co-infections, it is a gem to read, because you just feel so validated that you're not alone, whether
Yeah.
you've gone through it either way. I am so grateful that you came on to share your story and your testing. And I'm hoping that we can save some people from having to go through what your husband, myself, and a lot of other people I know have had to go through.
Yeah, that's the goal. We're on a mission to change the standard of care, right? We don't want this. We're a specialty lab right now, but we are making this mainstream. And I want so that when people go to their primary care physician someday, this becomes that new standard of care to supplant
Yeah.
these broken tests. And you mentioned ways to get us, galaxydx.com. I think we are pushing the envelope and growing and learning every day. We love to work with providers. So if there's any providers out there that want to learn more, we're happy to engage. And we have a lot of educational materials that we're building that are on our website and that are continuing to go. We have webinars every either month or couple of months that provide information on these pathogens. And so we want to be a resource to educate people and to tell them the whys behind what's the science, but hopefully make it accessible so people can understand and really drive change so that
Love it.
people can get the answers they deserve.
And is it practitioners only, or could a coach
Yeah,
become an account? A coach
absolutely.
could. Oh, sweet. Okay.
Yeah. I
Because
mean,
a lot of times, if the doctors don't test, like I have a lab I use. I don't diagnose, treat, or cure. However, I can certainly say now we refer you to a physician because now we have the evidence they didn't want to test for.
yeah.
We find someone that'll work with us, so it
Yeah, I
doesn't
mean,
have
if
to
you
be
go
a
to diagnostic
practitioner.
testing, you can
Yeah.
set up an account, and we tell people, because sometimes people are a little intimidated to treat tick-borne disease because it is complicated. But then we also tell them, like, look, whatever you're focusing on, if you're focusing on gut health or hormone health or whatever you're focusing on, if you have an underlying pathogen, that patient's not going to be responding to your treatment. And so you should know. And so just because testing and treatment can be different avenues, but you should test and then find somebody that you can refer them to, because you don't want patients failing treatment protocols. We know a lot of providers that they do fantastic work, but if you have an underlying cause that you're not addressing, then that patient's going to struggle and it's going to make it
Absolutely.
harder. And so test,
Absolutely.
get it
Yeah.
tested, and then refer out if you don't feel comfortable treating. And then if you want to learn more about treatment, there's a lot of good resources that we can show you to help you along the way. We've got fantastic clinical advisory board members that some of them have training courses and other things. And so that's available too if you want to learn more.
Love it. Thank you. Thank you so much. This has been just a fantastic conversation. And my hope is that if we reach one person, it's been worth it, right?
Yeah.
Or one provider that starts hopefully this ripple effect of let's
Yes.
make this a standard and not a specialty. type of testing. Let's get the right type of testing. If you can measure it, you can work with it. That's what they used to say back in our DNA testing group. If you can measure it, you can work with it, because you don't want to guess at what you're looking for, especially around these chronic illnesses or these pathogens. So Nicole Bell. I had Nikki Schultek on too. So I'm sure you're
Nikki's
familiar
great.
with Nikki.
Yes.
So I might do you guys back-to-back weeks. So then we can have a whole line, because she's all about advancing the research, and she was fantastic. And that's why, so I'm thinking Nicole. So
she was the one that helped me donate my husband's brain. So she's a good friend. She's doing fantastic work at LSPI and really uncovering root causes. So yes.
Yeah. I think I'll put you guys back-to-back weeks, and then it'll be a nice little Lyme series. I love doing different series so we can dive deeper. So yeah, this is fantastic. Thank you so very much. Keep up the good work on behalf of the Lymies out there. It doesn't define me. I know it's a part of me, but it certainly doesn't define me. And the other thing is, dial in your lifestyle, because how you live affects how these things can really impact too. If you're living an unhealthy lifestyle, you're really opening your immune system up. Inflammation, all these things drive it.
Absolutely.
Okay, everybody, please, if you share none of my other podcasts, share this one so we can get the word out. It is one of the biggest epidemic out there that is little talked about. So let's literally save some lives here and get the right information out there. Please share this podcast with everybody and get out there, make it a great day, be your most authentic self. And thank you for joining us. Thank you for tuning into my podcast. If you enjoyed this week's episode, I'd love for you to share it with someone who'd find the information useful. Please leave a review anywhere you listen to podcasts, and it'll help the information get out to others. If you're interested in seeing if we're a great fit to work together, the link is in the show notes below, where you can sign up for a free consultation with me. So go make it a great day and let your authentic self shine.